All right, well, I'm joined here today with Chris. We got his 2015 Ram, and we're going to be lifting it up a little bit today, and we're doing that because...
Increase the ride height and level out the truck, as well as add some increased payload capacity in the rear with some new springs.
Yeah, we'll basically bring you through the process a little bit, kind of show you a little bit of a walkthrough on what to expect, and we're going to try to get some baseline measurements and then some measurements after, so you could kind of see what you could expect out of doing a kit like what Chris is going to do. All right, we're taking baseline measurements for the rear. So right now, stock, we're looking at...
just under, or just over 40 inches.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, and we're going to take a baseline off the back, bottom of the hitch, which is just sitting at around 19. Okay, here's stock on the front, and we're at 36 5/8 thereabouts.
Right to the bottom of the license plate frame, that should be about 17.
About 17, bottom of the license plate frame.
And we're measuring all these off the ground. Laid out here on the workbench, we've got our parts. We're going to be installing Bilstein 5100 shocks in both the front and rear of the truck. These shocks here are the front ones. These are ride height adjustable. You can select different ride heights based on which groove you put this ring in. I've already set them for the 2.8 setting, which is going to be the maximum amount of lift that these shocks are capable of. These will be going in the front. Obviously, these are the rears, pretty straightforward. They just get bolted in. And then the parts that come with the fronts, you got the retainer ring and the nut and washer assembly. So we got two of those. For the increased load capacity, I've got these springs from TufTruck. They are supposed to add about 25% more payload capacity, so we'll be installing them along with the rear shocks on the rear axle. Okay, so kind of self-explanatory, but step one is pretty much get your truck in the air. We're jacking it up, putting the frame on jack stands, and then we'll manipulate the rear end with the jack so that you can get the tires off, springs out, and shocks out. Okay, so we've noticed on the back end you have to take out that inner shroud to get at the top bolt Wheel
for
well
the
liner.
wheel well liner to get at the top bolt for the shock. So
8mm. Quick work of it. Basically, fall right out.
all right, so then you could gain access to your top shock nut. Okay, so the other thing you got to do before you're able to just drop the axle down, get the springs out, is get your sway bar end links unattached so that that doesn't bind up the axle. So you see you're going to want to get two box wrenches on it, one on the end stud where it's hexed out and one on the nut.
8mm for the bolt and 18 for the nut. Last bolt we got to disconnect is this track bar bolt so we can lower the whole axle and take the springs out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now we're going to go ahead and drop out the rear axle of the truck so we can change out the springs.
Oh, there they are, free floating.
Yeah. You got the stock springs on your left and the replacement springs on the right.
So I mean they're about the same length, but the compression rating
should be different.
is different.
So we'll find out.
Okay, now it's pretty much just slap it back together using the new parts. So we already got the springs in.
We hook the track bar back on first, which is the one down there on the axle. Get the sway bar end links hooked on, and then we'll install the new shock absorbers. And that pretty much will be the rear end done, other than putting the liners back in the wheel wells. Check our torque.
So it's pretty much throw the shrouds back in and back end's complete, right?
Pretty much. We're onto the front now. Saw the rear. So we're going to be changing out the shock, which is within this spring strut assembly. And in order to do that, we're going to have to take that whole assembly out. To do that, it's fairly simple. We remove the brake pads, caliper bracket, etc. all off. We're going to hang them up on the control arm just to support them so it's not hanging by the hose. We're going to disconnect the upper ball joint from the control arm, the tie rod, and the sway bar end link. Once we have all that stuff disconnected, then we'll remove the actual strut shock assembly out. So we're going to get started on that.
Yeah, so we're kind of finding if you put a little penetrating lube in there, it kind of helps persuade that ball joint out.
Yes, sir. We already got the tie rod disconnected. Go onto the sway bar end link. Need that 16. Alright, so we got our sway bar end link disconnected, our tie rod, and our ball joints. Now we're going to separate the control arm from the spindle. And this is the challenging part.
Here's the movie making trick. Once we actually get that to budge, you redo that line, or I'll just splice in wherever it starts moving. Yeah, so we found that sometimes you need a long bar and just kind of get in there and under the upper control arm and just kind of set it in that spring pocket and pry it apart.
Alright. Well, next is take out that bolt, and this whole thing will slide it out. There's our factory strut assembly. Next step will be, and we'll have video of this, we're going to take this bolt off. Well, first we're going to compress the spring with a spring compressor. And then we'll take the bolt off the top, put the new shock in, put all this back together, and put it back into the truck. One thing we do take note of, if you look, this has got a pointed edge here. So when you reinstall that into the truck, make sure that pointed edge is facing out towards you in that strut tower. And that'll line your 3 nuts studs up. All right, let's go compress the spring.
Okay, so what we're going to do first is just hit it with the impact, and then we're going to get 2 box wrenches on this thing. One on the main nut and one on the top of the shock stud, and we should be able to loosen it up.
task best taken on with help.
Yeah. As you loosen this up, it does get easier though,
Yes.
because the nut starts coming out of the pocket and you're able to get the wrench on it easier.
At this point, it's not
Yeah.
a big deal. Alright, good, Andrew. Offset wrench would make it a lot easier. Just saying. Okay. I'll keep that in mind for the next time I do this.
Add it off the list of tools you need, right?
Yeah.
So viewers, if you have someone you know that has an offset box wrench, that may make it a little easier to get at that nut. We didn't have one.
Okay. And we got to take this ring off and then this spring seat, because we're going to reuse the spring seat, this cover, and that top piece.
Ginger with it. Or maybe not.
One thing to note, when you're putting this on, this part comes with the kit. There's a little groove here, which is what this ring is going to sit on. So make sure you put this on properly when you install it. And it'll sit right on that ring for your height setting, height adjustment. We're going to put the spring seat on. Make sure you put it on properly so it's flared upwards, so it sits on this. You see what I'm talking about? So there we go. So that's sitting on there nicely. Set our spring on. Make sure the spring falls into the pocket here so it lines up appropriately. And we got a little bumper thingy. I don't know what it's called, but bumper thingy sounds good. Same thing, you're going to line up your plastic on the top to match. There's little blue marks, at least on mine there is, where that's supposed to line up. And there we go. Now we throw our washer supplied with the shock and our nut. That helps. Dexterity is important at this point. And for the most part, we're going to tighten that all down and then install our strut.
Now this is going to go together different than how this OEM came out. So what we are able to do is use a hexed socket and the Allen keyway, and then put the Allen keyway through the hex socket.
Got to find the right hex socket.
And tighten it up like that, which does make life easier.
A lot easier. Got our hex. We're using a 13/16 spark plug wrench to do the job. Seems to work fairly well. And a 7/8 box wrench to turn said spark plug wrench. You want to hold that up there, Andrew?
Oh,
Got it?
nope. I need leverage.
This will take, again, a little finesse here.
Might need to compress it down a little bit more to
You
get it
might
on all
need
the
to
way.
do that. So, all right,
I
let's
think you probably hit the rubber.
probably put a little pressure.
So yeah, it'll be a series of, you know, compressing the spring down enough so that you could get the clearance to get that nut to bottom out on the shock.
the new shock installed with the old spring top, spring seat, etc. We're going to put it back into the truck. Like I said earlier, you want to make sure that this pointed end is what's pointing outward towards you, so that the holes on the spring or on the shock tower line up. We got the new strut shock assembly into the truck. I started the bolts up here to keep it from falling out. I got the main bolt down on the lower control arm through with the nut on it. We're going to jack up this whole wheel hub assembly and get the upper ball joint and tie rod started, and the control arms and sway bar and the sway bar end link, and we'll tighten everything down, torque it, and it should be good. Go ahead and tap. All right, it's good. Okay, well, that's everything started, so now we just start torquing everything down.
Alright, so we pretty much got everything bolted back up, torqued to spec, pretty much throw the wheel on and take the after measurements. Okay, so we got everything installed. We're back here with the rear passenger wheel well. Now before it was about 40 inches, now we're sitting about 41. So we got a net of a total inch in the back, and so now we're gonna go to the hitch. That was 19. Now we're sitting right around 19 and a half at the hitch. Okay, now we're here up front. We got the front driver wheel well. Before we were sitting at about 36 and 5/8. Now we're right at, what would you say, 39 and a quarter?
Yeah, 39 and a quarter, 39 and an eighth, something in that range.
Okay.
So we got a pretty good increase in the front.
That's where we really anticipated to see most of the gain. And now we're looking at the bottom of the license plate. Now before we were hitting 17 inches. And oh shit, now we're hitting
About 20.
about 20. So you could tell the hitch isn't all that much higher, but we took a lot of the rake out of the truck. So it's going to be overall more level.
Front end definitely is sitting higher now, which is what the overall goal was, to get the front end sitting up. And
So-
the truck to sit level, which it now does.
So that's what you could expect out of this build if you do it yourself.
Exactly. Total cost, you're looking about $550 for the parts and your time. I don't know what a shop would charge to do it, because obviously we did it ourselves, but it's about $550 for the parts that you saw laid out there.